On Tuesday, the IDF threatened to intensify its bombing of targets in Gaza if Hamas doesn't come back to the, quote, genuine negotiating table. And as this conflict disintegrates back into turmoil, we are joined by IDF Major Elliot Chodoff to get the breaking news directly from the ground. Elliot, what can you tell us about the deteriorating situation in Gaza?
Last night, it's evening here, so I'm talking about Monday night, our time. The Israeli Air Force struck dozens of targets in Gaza, taking out, according to Hamas numbers, killing some 300 people, and most importantly, 6 or 7 or 8 leaders of Hamas in Gaza. Also, rocket launching sites, arms depots, entrances to tunnels. In other words, military targets. And you know, when Hamas says 300 people, they say, you know, they were all women and children. My guess is that there weren't too many women and children in the mix. It was a surprise strike, which means it caught Hamas out in the open. But I think what's important here, and I've been reading the reports all day, that the Israeli airstrike has shattered the ceasefire. I think it's important to understand the ceasefire ended on March 1st, and we have essentially given them almost 3 weeks of non-fire, essentially a ceasefire, in order to get an opportunity to get more of the hostages out. And instead, not only have they dug in and played all sorts of games, which surprises me not at all, but they've also used the period from the beginning of the ceasefire, plus these almost 3 weeks, to recruit more terrorists. Their numbers, according to our estimates, are back up to around 20,000, which means that they've replaced about half of those that we've killed. Not on the same quality, obviously, but numerically, we're dealing with people with guns. Booby trapping, mining, tripwiring, opening tunnels, producing more rockets. In other words, not surprisingly, again, we knew this was going to happen. They used the ceasefire to build themselves back up to some semblance of military capability. And our information was that they were also planning attacks. In other words, another shot at October 7th. Wow. They've said outright that October 7th was the first of many, and they mean it.
So what if Hamas just doesn't come back to the negotiating table? What will the IDF do next?
We'll continue to escalate. Here again, I think the contextual scenario is important here. The United States, and here I've got to say, the Trump administration has stood solidly, and with the strikes last night, we at least informed them. I think it was more coordinated than that, given the recent American strikes on the Houthis in Yemen, and the statement made by the administration today, by the White House, that America stands with Israel, and that all of these terrorist organizations, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Iranians, and all of their friends should know that all hell is going to break loose. This is all part of Trump's ongoing rhetoric, and he's backing it up. But in the interim, something happened, and that something was Adam Buehler, who was sent to negotiate as a subordinate to Witkoff, and he made some horrendous errors. I don't think he's a bad person. I think he didn't get it. First, by meeting directly with Hamas, which is incidentally a violation of American law, which prohibits meeting with terrorists directly. And then, worse than that, he could have slipped that one by. He could have said something along the lines of, we met in the hall and we stopped to exchange a few words, even if it's not true. That's how you do it diplomatically. But then he doubled down on it, and in public discussions and interviews, he was asked, well, Israel's very upset with you. He said, well, I know they are, but that's their problem. I'm paraphrasing. And America is not Israel's agent, and we have our own priorities and agendas. Now, of course, America is not Israel's agent, but by saying it, he sent the message to Hamas you can drive a wedge between America and Israel, which is something, by the way, the Biden administration did repeatedly. And the result was that last week Hamas turned around and said, "Oh, we've got a deal for you. We're holding one dual citizen, American Israeli citizen, alive. We'll trade him and 4 bodies of American dual citizens in return for a long-term ceasefire." Now, by this point, Buehler was out of the picture, and Witkoff turned around and shut that down and said, no way, no how. Uh, the Our plan is bigger than that and grander. We're not going to cut a separate deal. I say all of that as background because once that idea gets in to guys like the Hamas leadership, they run with it. And I think they were doubly surprised by what happened last night with the airstrikes because they figured that they had driven this wedge between the United States and Israel, even though Witkoff said, it's not the case, and Hamas needs to know the time is not on their side. They don't hear that, and it's not just them. We all want to hear what we want to hear. We don't want to hear what we don't want to hear. So that was sort of the background part. Now, the airstrike part of it is critical in understanding where Israel is because it's one of these. If it goes one way, we can go this way, and if it goes the other way, we can go the other way. Our preference is for Hamas to wake up tomorrow morning and say, "Okay, mistake. Let's make a deal. Let's go with the Witkoff plan to release 10 hostages over 3 weeks or 4 weeks or 5 weeks, whatever it is." The details in this case are really less important. They're holding somewhere between 20 and 24 live hostages. So if we can get half of them out, that's a major step forward. If not, then I imagine they're going to get struck again tonight by the Air Force. But the thing with airstrikes is the minute they step up with a serious offer, the airstrikes can stop instantaneously. In other words, even planes in the air can be called back. If this continues to escalate, in other words, they keep saying no, we're going to keep hitting them. The minute it goes to a ground offensive, and I don't want to predict, but next week, for all intents and purposes, the moving of 3, 4, 5 divisions of ground forces, that can't be turned off with a switch. Okay, that's a whole different level. It's different momentum. Once forces are on the ground in Gaza, stopping them means exposing them. It's a militarily totally different situation.
Here's the question. I think from the outside, there's 2 major objectives. Get the hostages home and make sure October 7th never happens again. It sort of sounds like, from what you're saying, that Hamas is working very actively to achieve that second goal of rearming, rebuilding. So yes. I guess the question from an outsider's perspective, obviously, thousands of miles away in America, why is Israel letting that happen? Shouldn't they? Is it simply they don't want the hostages harmed? It seems like a lot of the gains that have been made are just deteriorating.
Okay, so first of all, the short answer is yes. We simply don't want the hostages harmed, and we simply want them back. And it's a dilemma when hostages are being held in general, and certainly when they're being held by savages like Hamas. I have choicer words, but I don't think they're appropriate for public consumption. You never know what the right move is because they kill people for no reason. So does threatening them endanger the hostages, as some people claim? Does it actually improve the chances of survival of the hostages, which I believe is the case? But I wouldn't bet a lot of money on it. You don't know. You're dealing with savages. And again, that's the most complimentary I can get. We want the hostages back, but obviously not at any price. A country can't say, you're holding 20 of our people, we're going to roll over and die for them. At the same time, yes, some of the gains have been eroded, I would say, but they're gains that can be reaccomplished. In other words, going back in, Hamas today unquestionably is weaker than it was on October 7th, 2023. It's significantly weaker. Tactically on the ground, it's weaker, and strategically, Iran is much weaker. Hezbollah is essentially out of the picture. Syria has been turned over, although that's a whole story in and of itself, perhaps for another discussion. But they don't have the solid support. And here's a good example of it. We struck them last night. Hezbollah didn't say a word because they can't.
Wow.
They've got their own problems. So we are ahead of where we were. There's been I would say, a slight, retreat of situation since the beginning of the ceasefire, but that's a price that we were willing to pay to get back hostages, and we got back some of them. And now we're at that point where this is really the difficult decision for a government. At what point do you say this is as far as we've gotten, and this is as far as we're going, and then shifting? It's not a simple one. I don't envy the people sitting in those seats making those decisions.
Elliot Chodoff, you are a wealth of information. We're going to have you back on. Obviously, this is a very rapidly developing situation. Elliot,
Yes.
Toda Rabah, thank you so much, my friend.
My pleasure, always.